Welcome to episode 9 of Back to Beverly, and thanks for tuning in. My next guest was recently named one of LA's top 100 lawyers and top 500 most influential executives by the Los Angeles Business Journal. Throughout his career, he has worked for some of the most prestigious law firms in the country, including Brobeck, Flager, and Harrison, DLA Piper, and now is partner in charge of the LA office at Baker McKenzie. Outside of the courtroom, he enjoys drumming with his band and has been known to sell out the whiskey at least once a year, which we touch on a bit in the episode. I really enjoyed our conversation and hope you will too, so here's my interview with Perrie Weiner, partner in charge of the Los Angeles office at Baker McKenzie. My next guest has spent over 30 years as a practicing attorney with a focus primarily on securities class action and shareholder derivative litigation, as well as SEC enforcement matters. He is widely acknowledged as the go-to advocate for hedge funds facing complex suits and CEOs squaring off against the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. He has received countless awards throughout his career and was recently named one of Los Angeles Business Journal's top 100 lawyers in 2022. Please join me in welcoming to the show the partner in charge of Baker McKenzie's Los Angeles office and Beverly High grad class of 78, Perrie Weiner. Perrie, thanks for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dillon.
So how does it feel to be reminiscing about your Beverly days? And as I understand it, we sort of followed a similar path, first graduating El Rodeo before moving on to Beverly.
It's fantastic. Those were some of the happiest years of my life. I mean, it was, I grew up in Beverly Hills. I went to El Rodeo. My wife went to El Rodeo in Beverly too. She was 3 years behind me.
Okay.
We're about to hit we're married now 32 years. So it was a Beverly union and reunion that worked really well.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on 32 years. That's a hell of a time. Did you mind me out? Did the romance begin at Beverly or thereafter, or you reconnect?
Oddly, it was afterwards. We both met through our respect. I had a close friend of mine. She had a close friend of hers. They were dating. They introduced us after school.
Yeah.
But no doubt, having those similar common roots,
sure,
gives you that common ground, and so it's fun. And I live on Linden and Elvado, 700 block, which is very close to El Rodeo.
Okay.
And my son attended 2 years at El Rodeo as well. He was at the Willows, and then he took a test at El Rodeo because his buddies, he was in Hoop Masters and was playing basketball, great athlete, big kid. And so he tested out of fourth grade at El Rodeo, skipped, went to fifth. I did fifth and sixth in El Rodeo. So I had a blast because I would wake up in the morning. We had this yellow lab named Lucky. I would grab the dog, I'd grab my son, we'd walk to El Rodeo, and I'd run into friends that I had whose kids were going to El Rodeo too. So it was a lot of fun.
I love that. I don't know what number you are on Linden, but I basically grew up at my best friend's place at 705. So I'm sure nearby.
Right across the street.
Okay, very cool. So take me through a little bit about what you were involved with in your high school years. I mean, given your successful career as an attorney, one might assume you were on the debate team back in the day. It's kind of funny. I don't even know. Did we have a debate team in Beverly, and were you on it?
If we had it, I wasn't aware of it.
Okay.
I remember taking this class in parliamentary procedure, and it was great because it taught you public speaking, which I thought was interesting and fun. Ironically, I was a really good student at Beverly. I graduated. I don't think I ever got anything less than an A-. I had graduated like a 4.2 or 4.3. But it was just a fun environment. Like El Rodeo was great.
Yeah.
I remember our graduation at El Rodeo vividly on the tennis court of one of my friends' houses. And then at Beverly too, just the parties, the fun, the weekends in Palm Springs, going to Tees Beach, which was really a big deal back at Beverly. That's where we're back on the beaches now.
Okay.
And just a great group of people that I've stayed friends with over the years.
Yeah. Did you play sports? Were you in student government?
It's funny. My older brother, Jeff, was 10 years ahead of me. Played football at Beverly. He's probably the biggest kid to come out of Beverly, 6'5", 250 defensive tackle.
Wow.
And so when I was coming up, they were watching for me. I was playing Pop Warner, but because my brother had messed up his knee and concussions, my parents would not sign the waiver. So I played tennis and I played music, and I had bands in high school and played a bunch of clubs up on Sunset, and just really Really enjoyed the music side of it and that sort of thing. I didn't get that heavily involved in any of the teams and that sort of thing.
Sure. So graduate Beverly, you decided to stick around LA and go to UCLA, and then from there, you get your law degree from Loyola. Did you always know that you wanted to stay in LA for your college years and thereafter?
It's funny, when I graduated, when I was graduating Beverly and applied to college, I was admitted to an Ivy League school back east. And then I took a trip out there and I said, there is no effing way I'm going to go to the East Coast. And even in California, I'd only applied and was accepted at Berkeley. And I went up with one of my Beverly friends, and took a look at Berkeley. I said, not doing that either. So I applied for an inter-school transfer to UCLA, which is where my older brother and sister went. And I remember hanging out at that rec center there with that humongous Olympic-sized pool. And I just love Los Angeles. I love sailing. I love tennis. I love all the outdoor sports. And frankly, I have a house in Malibu. I'm out in Malibu right now, just because it's so beautiful. And I can't imagine why anyone would ever choose to leave LA. Certainly not permanently.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny you say that about the East Coast. So I ended up going to school back east, actually in New England. And I think part of me was knowing that I'd always live here eventually. And so it was like, hey, let me get 4 years of something else just so that I know how great LA truly is.
It's funny you say that, because when I do business trips to New York, which I do frequently, part of the reason why I love it so much is I know I can leave.
Right, exactly. It's a nice place to visit.
Right.
So on the topic of Loyola, you touched a little bit about it earlier, about your passion for music. There's a story I heard about a performance by a rock band that ends up leading to a federal judicial externship that you land. Can you talk a little bit about that story and how that role set you on the path you are today?
Sure. I mean, it was very serendipitous. I love music. The school does this fundraiser annually for charity. It's called Libel and Slander Night. At least it was at that time. And so I, together with a few of my classmates there, formed a libel and slander rock band. And so we played, and there were, one of the great attributes of Loyola is a lot of high percentage of the judges in LA went there for law school, both federal and state court judges. And so because it was a fundraiser, it was at the school, this federal judge attended, he saw me perform, came up to me after we were done, and he said, that was pretty cool. He said, what makes you want to do, what made you want to do this? And I said, I don't know what made me want to go to law school. I can tell you what makes you want to play in a band. that's really fun stuff. And so he said, you know what? I think that's very cool. How would you like to come clerk for me? And he hands me his card, and I checked with my older brother, and he said, it is rare to get that sort of opportunity. And he said, when you get that, jump on it. And so I clerked for 2 years after law school for this federal judge, which then launched me, easily. Because at that point, every major law firm in LA was soliciting me from the federal courthouse to come and work for them.
Fascinating. And I love how sort of it fell into place for you. I've talked about this on previous episodes, and I'm a big believer in it, that everything in life happens for a reason. Have you ever, I'm curious your thoughts on that, and have you ever given any thought in the context of your own life?
I think that serendipity has a lot to do with things. One of the books that I read when I was older that I would recommend to anyone young starting out is a book called The Secret. And it's about self-actualization and seeing yourself in the way you want to end up. And if you can see yourself at the end point and imagine yourself there, if you can see it, you can be it, you can do it. Yep. I've always been a firm believer in that. And a legal recruiter once said to me, because I said, in terms of my own career, I said, that was pretty lucky. He says, well, the way I define luck is where hard work meets opportunity. Yeah. So I've been very blessed and very fortunate in my career, and I'm extremely grateful for it.
Very cool. So you graduate Loyola and you end up going into private practice for a pretty legendary San Francisco firm, Brobeck, Flager and Harrison, where you firsthand see the rise and fall of many of the tech firms involved in the tech bubble of the late 90s, early 2000s. Can you share a bit about that experience and how the dot-com bubble bursting led to an opportunity for you to create a new avenue of business with hedge funds and their investments into some of the firms that you represented?
Sure. It was a rare opportunity. At the time, Brobeck was the it firm in California, in fact, nationally, because Brobeck had accelerated beyond all the non-New York firms, then was overtaking the New York firms, both in stature. It was the first firm to go international. In the UK, it was Brobeck, Hale and Hogan. It was a joint venture with three major law firms. The New York firms got scared because Brobeck was paying so much money to the young lawyers, they couldn't even keep pace, and even the investment banks. So it started the first salary war among law firms and investment banks trying to catch us, because we were at the epicenter in the tech market in Palo Alto before any other firm knew what was going on. And you couldn't go public basically unless you were a client of the firm. So it was a front row seat, of what to do, and also a front row seat of what not to do as a law firm, because the law firm was the probably the finest trial law firm that existed at the time. Just fantastic lawyers, but not huge in business and technology. But because we were doing so well in that area overnight, the chairman morphed the firm from a litigation-centric firm to a business and technology firm. We started buying buildings and building buildings and doing things that lawyers ought not to do because they don't do that very intelligently. And so leveraged and hired like 250 of the best and brightest corporate lawyers from around the country that descended on the firm in 1 year. And then everything came, it's like bad game of musical chairs, where the music stops and it's like, oh my God, we've got all this real estate, we've got all these people, and the market is completely dead. This is like late 90s, like 99. And so the firm, I left 6 months before the firm imploded. And but what was nice about it, and same thing with serendipity and that point and the mantra, and just keeping your eyes and ears open, because crisis could create opportunity if your awareness is there. And all these tech companies that Brobeck had taken public were starving for financing. They couldn't get conventional financing. So no one really knew what hedge funds were 20 years ago, or pipe financings, the acronym PIPE. Most corporate lawyers didn't know what it meant, certainly no litigators. So I carved a niche within Securities representing hedge funds, both in securities litigation and also SEC investigations and enforcement actions, and created a whole area that the only firm that even touched that in New York was a firm called Schulte Roth. And the big firms had not gotten engaged in that. And that's where I started being able to stand out from my peer group.
And that ultimately leads you to your next role at what becomes DLA Piper. And in your time there, the firm's headcount grew significantly under your leadership in the LA office. You're pretty instrumental in that growth. Did the practice of managing and building a firm's region require a different set of skills than what you were used to working as an attorney advising your clients?
Absolutely. It required understanding the business of law as opposed to just being a lawyer. I mean, I love being a lawyer, but I really love the business of law as well. And what was very cool is when I joined what was then called Piper Reddick, which became DLA, it was 950 lawyers. There had just been a merger between the Baltimore firm of Piper Marbury and the Chicago firm of Reddick and Wolf. The two co-chairs flew out to LA and they said, look, we know you can go anywhere you want, but we're going to offer you something that no other firm will offer a guy your age. I said, what's that? They said, we don't really have a securities practice. You're going to be it, and you're going to chair it. You're going to build it the way you see fit. So I built it from a couple of people to 85 people while I was there. Because of the success of my own practice, they put me on what was called the policy committee, which you had to be voted on by over half the partners. And then from there, plucked off to the executive committee. And while I was on the executive committee, we imagined what a global law firm would look like. And so the two originators, the visionaries, wanted us to transform the firm. And so we sat, there was like a group of 12 of us in the executive committee, and we went from 950 lawyers to 4,300 lawyers into a global law firm. And that was an incredible experience. And the two co-chairs understood that, we don't really know how to do this exactly. So we were the first firm to have a program that was put together by someone at Harvard Business School that it was just tailored to our firm and to our executive committee, studying models of law firms and accounting firms that succeeded, businesses too, and those that failed, and trying to figure out, how do you build a global law firm? How do you take it forward? So it was a crash course and an incredible journey in learning the business of law. And from there, in addition to the executive and policy committee, I then went on to become managing partner in LA. And when I started there, it was just a small handful of lawyers in one office. And by the time I left, it went from like 4 to 115 or 120 in two offices. And ironically, the downtown office that we acquired was my old Brobeck space where I was a young lawyer at 550 Hope. So it was a very kind of cool way to come full circle.
Sure. And I imagine, learning and studying the business of law and helping to grow DLA Piper, having seen firsthand how Brobeck melted down and what not to do was probably helpful. Is that safe to assume?
Absolutely. It teaches you to never forget what your strengths are, to diversify, not to think that any current trend is going to be the panacea and the be all end all.
Right.
It's okay to go in with a toe and then a foot, but not 2 feet and not permanently. And you always want to be diversified and smart about the business of law.
Sure. And sort of like the old adage, slow and steady wins the race, right? I mean, the people that try to grow overnight, it never seems to work out.
Right.
So after 17 years at DLA Piper, you make the move to the firm that you're currently at, Baker McKenzie. What ultimately prompted your decision to switch firms?
It was pretty cool because Baker McKenzie is a 70-plus-year-old law firm that was the first truly global law firm in the world. It has DNA, it has global in its DNA. And in contrast to the firm I came from, Baker McKenzie's got this tremendous name. I mean, widely recognized, but it didn't have an LA office. Yet it opened its LA office a year and a half before I joined, with only 4 lawyers, 3 from a firm called Hogan Lovells and 1 from who was legacy Baker McKenzie from San Francisco. And so the CEO came down and met with me and said, look, we'd like you to do for us what you've done successfully before, and we want you to be our partner in charge of the LA office and build it. And we also want you to continue to build our securities practice. So luckily, despite COVID, I took it from 4 lawyers, and in the 3 years that I've been there, went to 44 lawyers in no time, and moved the offices twice. And we're on a very fast growth curve and having fun and really enjoying the process.
And managing a firm through the COVID-19 pandemic, which I'm sure has been challenging as well. I can only imagine.
It is. We're a 7,000 lawyer law firm around the globe with 80 offices globally. It's a tremendous firm, tremendous platform with opportunities. I have a large international practice too, with cases in Hong Kong and the UK. It's perfect for me, for a guy. I've only known big firms my entire career. But what's nice about working there, especially in LA, and the environment and the excitement that we've created, is it's got the nimbleness of more of a startup than a firm that's been around for 70 years.
Interesting. So a little bit of each, right? Like you have the legacy and the DNA that goes deep, but also the feeling of a younger brand.
In fact, I'm the old guy in the room, because I tell you, in that firm, everyone's young, energetic. And what's funny is, the CEO said to me, Perry, the LA office will be your legacy. And I said, no, it's everyone's legacy. And so everyone that's there feels that energy and commitment, and it drives the office.
It's interesting to say that. I think it's a testament to the person that builds it, right? I mean, because it's so important to foster a culture that is going to work, and everybody's going to get along and steer the ship in the right direction. And there could be one bad apple that might take away from that, but to have everybody that feels a part of the legacy and that they're building something cool and important is a testament to so much of who's building that team.
Thank you.
And my next question was going to be, do you enjoy, that aspect of work? But it sounds like you are, the building of the teams and managing offices.
It's awesome because, I get a chance to make sure that we build the office with like-minded people who are nice people. You work hard as a lawyer, but you want people to enjoy the journey and to want to go out together, hang out together, the camaraderie. And, and having been around the block a few times, I know what energy works and what environment doesn't. So I strive to be very careful about the people that I let in, and we let into the LA office.
Sure. So I want to dig in a little bit now into the work that you've done throughout your career, which includes mainly a focus on securities, class actions, and SEC enforcement matters. How challenging is it to go up against the full weight of the American government when the SEC brings a case against one of your clients, or someone has had a case brought against them and they come to you?
It's very challenging in the sense that the government wields an awful lot of power. The consequences could be extraordinary. It could be anything from losing your license as a hedge fund investment advisor to going to jail for insider trading. So the stakes are really high. The amounts of money and controversy are significant. And I feel very fortunate that clients repose that sort of trust in me when we're coming up against the SEC or the Department of Justice. But it's fun. I mean, the SEC is very well funded, especially under Democratic You'll see like when Republicans are in office, it gets, the money gets pulled away. When Democrats are in office, it's heavy regulation. So I knew that what was going to happen during this administration is going to be an uptick in SEC investigations and enforcement actions. And so, for example, I'm litigating the SPAC litigation, which is really explosive now. And the SEC is all over that. And so are plaintiffs' lawyers who are opportunistic and looking for opportunities to score a big one, bringing a class action.
Interesting. The SPAC stuff's fascinating just because it was, you couldn't turn on the news and not hear about it for like a year there. And it feels like a lot of those companies that went public via the SPAC aren't doing as well. Is that sort of why is that because the SEC is coming after them and they have to divulge more information, or what do you credit that to?
It's a great question. The SEC, just like when I was dealing with hedge funds, the SEC, when it wants to learn about something new, it opens what are called orders of investigation, then sends out subpoenas, and then kind of kicks the tires. And so they feel that because SPACs eclipsed the IPO market, because more companies were going public through a SPAC than through a traditional IPO, the SEC was getting a little scared because of the volume of the deals and the size of the deals, because these weren't $50 million or $100 million deals. These were $3 billion, $5 billion, $6 billion, and they were happening right and left, so much so that the Goldman Sachs of the world jumped in both feet to try to get involved in it, Citi, all the major investment banks. And so, but because the SEC has been taking a very careful look and looking at issues such as transparency, conflicts of interest, founders' fees and compensation, and things of that sort, the major investment banks have kind of backed off a little bit, and there's been a pause button. But it's not really just the SPAC market. The entire capital market structure now and stock market is roiling, what's going on now, and it's kind of upside down, which is, when you have this dislocation in the market, that's what sparks SEC investigations, enforcement actions, and securities class action, which is why we've been busier than hell over the last while.
I guess a good thing for an attorney that works in that space.
Yeah, just trying to keep clients calm, but assuring them that it'll be okay.
Sure. So it sort of brings me into my next question, in that you obviously have had a long and successful career with a Rolodex probably as large as any other attorney in the country. Do relationships in the parts of law that you practice play a role in either settling cases or achieving favorable results for your clients?
Absolutely. But it's not relationships and just knowing people and having people like you. It's having them, respect you and make sure that they believe and know that you practice with integrity. Because when you're against the SEC and you go against the same people over and over again, there's always, with new lawyers or lawyers I'm not familiar with, there's a mistrust sometimes in terms of the veracity of the lawyer. But I'm very careful never to overstep. I'm aggressive. I've got a reputation of being a highly aggressive litigator and trial lawyer, but I never overstep. I never misrepresent. And when you develop that sort of reputation, it carries you a long way, even with plaintiffs' lawyers. And when you're on the same side of the case with other co-defense lawyers in major cases. And if you have that good working relationship and that mutual respect, and they know you're going to do not just a great job, but also be honest and practice with integrity, that goes a long way.
Yeah. Interesting. So it sort of translates, right? Relationships across, it doesn't matter what the law, but helps you one way or another. One thing I want to transition to, and we touched on a little earlier, is how successful you've been in sort of creating little niches for yourself, and more recently handled lease litigation and restructuring when the pandemic hit and really affected the retail landscape. When did that dawn on you that this was going to be an area where both retail store operators and landlords were going to need legal advice and representation? I mean, did the pandemic hit and you say, hey, this is an area that I should, sort of read up on and study?
I look at the horizons. I also listen to clients' needs, but I was talking to one of the first clients of mine involved in that guitar center that had 250. I love that store because that's the place I used to go when I was a kid and play. Pull the guitars off the wall and play, over the summer and try the drum sets. But great company. But they had 250 brick and mortar locations around the U.S., which were all shuttered during the pandemic. And so for a lot of companies like that, real estate's the biggest line item. And if you can't use it, but you're paying for it, that's a bad thing. And you're not doing business either, and you're paying that rent, that's a really bad thing. And, most real estate lawyers, the leases are usually very one-sided, favoring the landlord. And so I looked at it, and I looked at it fresh with a fresh pair of eyes. And I thought about like these legal doctrines that were from back in law school, like an introductory contracts or real estate class about impossibility, impracticability, frustration of purpose, concepts that really fit in a COVID setting that is something no one's ever seen before. It's not really like a force majeure event. And so I started going after defensively first, clients that wanted to get out of their leases or renegotiate their leases or restructure their leases, but then took it the next step and started going after them aggressively, filing what were called declaratory relief actions. And landlords couldn't believe that I was suing them under their lease.
Right.
And so what was very effective in the negotiation, they said, look, can you afford to take this case to trial and lose? He goes, granted, these are untested areas. No one knows how the judges would come out, but you've got at least 30 other tenants in that one shopping center, and you've got shopping centers all around the country. They all have the same lease. Right. So if I invalidate your key provision, guess what happens next? Right. Guess who my next clients are?
Yeah. And was that part, I imagine that was part of the strategy to sort of get them to the table to say, hey, look, we don't necessarily want to go to trial here, but let's work something out.
Right.
Got it.
Got them to be reasonable in a very unusual environment.
Yeah. And the Guitar Center, just as an example, was that a client you were working with on other matters or was someone they just called you up?
Completely other matters. Yeah. And just during the conversation said, hey, we've got this issue. What do you think?
Yeah. Interesting. And it segues nicely into my next question, which is something that you enjoy doing out of the office, which is performing in a band. Drumming, I believe, is your specialty. And the band that you perform in now has a pretty fun play on words, as well as some other bands you've played in throughout the years. How long have you been drumming? Can you share some of those other fun names that of the band names you've assembled over the years?
I drummed a lot when I was in high school. I stopped, and then a paralegal when I was at DLA came over to me and said, hey, there's this thing called Law Rocks in the UK. It's coming to the US. It's going to start in LA. There's going to be a performance at the Whiskey on Sunset. Are you interested? And I said, well, what is it? He said, it's a battle of the bands. Like they're trying to get big law firms to form their own bands, to designate a charity and to compete on stage. And it's all for charity and all for fun. And I said, count me in. And so the first band name, because at the time I was with DLA, was Run DLA. Wow. And then and we won 3 out of the 5 years we had done that. And then when I went to, and I combined it with fun too, because the charities of choice were first Public Council and then LA Food Bank, but then Jim Mora was coaching the UCLA football team, and I was introduced to him through a mutual friend. And so the Jim Mora Count on Me Children's Foundation became our foundation at the time. So Jim would come to the event and his wife Shannon would get up on stage, and we'd shoot jerseys out into the audience that said Run DLA, which was a lot of fun. And to be able to sell out the Whiskey on a weekend as a lawyer was a pretty cool thing. And being up in the green room, knowing that the guys from Aerosmith and all these other legendary bands, and it was the Doors. I mean, fantastic. And so last year they tried to resume it, and they went back to the bands that had won. They said, can you put your band back together again? I said, well, it's kind of a diaspora because a lot of the people that were in it left. They said, well, just try to find the people. I said, sure. I said, but I'm at a new firm, so let's call it Run DLA featuring Baker and the McKenzies. So that was the next title. Yeah. And then one of my partners at Baker McKenzie during our annual retreat said, hey, Perry, we've got this house band that obviously, we want you to drum in, but we call it Baker and the McKenzies. So I said, oh, okay, I get it. So this is like a cease and desist letter. You can't use that name because it's being used already. I said, how about I come up with a new name? So she said, sure. So I came up with Run BMC. Okay. And that's now our current name. And we perform with that. And we do it every year now at the Whiskey on Sunset in April.
Yeah. It's cool that you've been able to sell that out and go amongst some of the legends, like you were saying, that have performed there throughout history. So I got to ask, obviously you seem very passionate about drumming. You did a lot growing up. If you didn't have such a successful career as an attorney, do you think maybe you would have pursued that rock and roll lifestyle? Obviously growing up LA 60s, 70s, it must have crossed your mind a couple of times.
I certainly would have loved to have. My parents persuaded me otherwise, but I came to the realization, I'm a realist, and I figured I can't sing. There's no way. And I don't like to do something I can't do really well and succeed at. And while I did play guitar, I wasn't as good on the guitar as I was on the drums. So if I could have been out in front and it was able to sing, yeah, I absolutely would have done it. But between not being able to do that so well and my parents saying, pick something else. Use that as for fun. Don't use that as your career. I decided probably better go to law school.
Yeah, well, I guess smart decision seeing what you've achieved throughout your career. So I had a lot of fun. It's been great chatting. Before I let you go, is there one piece of advice that you'd give to a student at Beverly or someone at that age that might be interested in pursuing a career similar to yours?
It's basically follow your passion. And even if you can't figure that out, pick any path, and you just kind of fall into things, as sort of what happened with me in my career. But you just have to be very present. And one of the things when you're young is your head kind of spins around and swirls with all these things going on, and you can't really focus. But as you get older, if you learn to quiet your mind, and I actually went to one of these courses at UCLA on mindfulness and keeping yourself centered and focused, almost in a meditative state. And if you do that, all sorts of creative ideas come your way, and things that you didn't realize were opportunities, you'll suddenly realize are opportunities. And just go for it, because if you really put your mind to something, and going back to that book, The Secret and Self-Actualization, if you can see yourself as a successful person in a certain career that you want to be, if you can see it, you can do it, and you can be it.
Yeah. Amazing advice. And Perrie, I can't thank you enough for taking the time today. I've really enjoyed our chat, and hopefully we can get on again sometime, maybe back at Beverly in the KBEV studio.
Love to do that. Thanks, Dillon. That was awesome.
Thanks again for listening. And just a reminder, if you enjoyed this interview, hit that subscribe button, leave me a review, and tell a friend. You can also find me on social at BackToBeverly on Instagram. Till next time, I'm your host, Dillon Curtis, signing off.
Did you press record?